So then, we are back with more understandings from the Renewed Covenant, from the Aramaic English translation of the Word. This particular translation from the Aramaic is from the original documents of the prophets of Israel, from the time of the prophets of Israel. Naming some of them, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Ezekiel, Daniel, and many others, Zechariah. In these days where then nature is starting then do precisely what the Messiah said would do, earthquakes in many areas, he precisely then described, and his intention was for the people in the future be acquainted of the events of the prophetic, so then they would not be caught unprepared. I think it's very fair teaching the people and sharing with them the true reality of the care of the Messiah, not because he was explaining the prophecies, but because he did understand the source from where those prophecies were coming from, and when the prophecies they come, they come. There is no way of changing it. So then it would be as if you were the Messiah teaching the people during the 490 days of the spring feast. You would walk forward with a huge obstacle behind you where you can't move back, or you can't change what was spoken. So then these days where so many parts of the world they are under the water, destruction, fire, it would be very refreshing then sharing with the people what the Messiah then wanted them to know. First, we must understand that from the time that we are at, we have only a maximum of 22 years per prophecy. The time of the Messiah's born date and time was found. The computer was able to find it. Per the original calendar, he was born in 3999. We are in 6012. He was placed on a pole 4032. He spent time with Samaritans 4031. From 4031, if you understand, then a couple of days meant a couple thousand years of Gentiles ruling. Ends in 6031. That's the maximum time of the prophecy. As we understand then, the first 1,000 years when you read Revelation 20th chapter, those times are already gone. From the Messiah's ascension, then from the time he spent with his people, spring feast, then you count 1,000 years. The time where the cities were in charge. In other words, nations were receiving directives from the holy cities. That's where you get the understanding from the city and the cities. Then in 1009, an event had taken place where then the holy city was destroyed by the Muslims and the tomb was destroyed. So then the destruction part of it gives you the first understanding of the pit. Okay? So have the pit in mind, 1009. Per the Creator's calendar, 5009. Then you give another 1,000 years for Satan to try to do his bid in mixing church with the Gentile rulership. It didn't work. So then in 2009 or 6009, his reign had ended. That's why the world is in such a shape these days where then nations are absolutely going to and fro. Then you remind yourself of Daniel. He said at the end of time, knowledge would increase. That's Daniel 12. And then people would go to and fro. To and fro means confusion. Because the world would make themselves from an area where transition had to be taking place. And it did. It started in 2009. So we are returning back to the truth, where then we find the Chinese taken over the leadership, what then the Messiah gave to the Samaritans. Secular leadership of the world's market. Whereas the divine understanding truly is the returning of the holy cities. So when you read the 11th chapter of Hebrews, then you understand. Always wanting the city, while they were yet living in a city that was the copy of the city. The city to come is Jerusalem from heaven. The city where he was in or forming at the time of the transition, based upon the copy of the city in Jerusalem, as the model from the desert. So then when people begin to understand and position themselves neatly as the Messiah intended it, understanding Scripture becomes very refreshing. And where do we trace back this information? From the Torah, from the 5 Megillahs of Moses, particularly in Leviticus, 23rd chapter, the feasts. So then when you read in Hebrews, the shadow prophetic events to come, in Hebrews 10, then you find prophetic shadows. What was it then? The Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, from the first verse through the 21st, you find the spring feast. This is precisely what the Messiah came to do. He completed the spring feast. The 22nd verse equals then the Megillah of Ruth, speaking of Gentiles. She was a Gentile person that came to the land of Israel. Meant the Gentiles would have then their time in the earth. Then comes the second half, 23rd through the 44th. That's this autumn feast, or Revelation, or the vengeance. So then we understand 490 days was the spring feast. Then we have then 22nd verse is the 2,000 years. Then you have the autumn feast. Spring, 2,000 years, autumn feast. So then at the time, Messiah then spent in 40:31, he spent 2 days with the Samaritans. He was given them 2,000 years of secular rulership. At the end of this 2,000, the Chinese is speaking up. They're going to lead the world's market. Divinely speaking, we already have the first 1,000 and the other 1,000. And we are doing the time of restoration. That's where then the layer of Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter, then comes. Where the Gentiles, even the Gentiles, the heathen, would be part of it. And then the cities returning. So then when you read the 20th chapter, then the armies of the world would encamp around of the holy cities and the beloved city. Then as you begin to read and understand in Hebraic understanding, it becomes a whole lot easier. And then Zechariah, the 8th chapter, gives you more information. And Zechariah 1:4 also gives you more information. Because the Messiah is coming in the 20th chapter at the layer of his return. And then when he rescues his people from the holy cities and the beloved city, then comes the shower of sulfur. Then the age is closed. So then in Zechariah, when you read, then Yahweh coming and then would stand an Mount of Olives and split in two, that's the layer of understanding of the new earth. When the new earth then is established, rebuilt, then comes Jerusalem from heaven. Because the context is of the city. If you read the understanding of it, it's not the person coming, it is the city. So Zechariah then you link with Hebrews the 11th chapter. Why? Because Hebrews are the updates for the second tabernacle services given to the Levites. So the Levites, they had the first service, the Torah. The second service, they have Hebrews. It is the update of the Torah, but only for the specific understanding of the second tabernacle services based from the first. It was a simple update. However, when we understand the word change, we think as a replacement rather than completion. There was not a change. There was a completion of, therefore do this. So there is not much time, 22 years maximum without the reduction. So then we understand the time that he spent with the Samaritans, 40:31. 2,000 years later would be 60:31. But then, have in mind, the Messiah said in Mechichiach, the first gospel, then the time would be reduced for the sake of the elect. The elect are the Hebraic people, not Gentiles. Why? Because then they would return to the truth. In 6009 or 2009, we left the reign of Satan as the deceiver, linking Gentile ruling and religion. Those were separated. His people, the set apart, they are returning to the holy cities, as it was during the time of Yohanan. Some say they were speaking of him on the island of Patmos, but he was not on Patmos while he was receiving the visions. He was in a holy city, because you can only have visions from heaven when you are in a holy city. Outside of the holy cities you must have dreams, and those must be interpreted. Thus the distinction from dreams and visions. So then precisely the time where then Yohanan was on the mainland in a holy city, the precise city where Yohanan was at was the perfect replica example of the copy of the city of Jerusalem, the city of God. This is what is returning. And where do we find the first city? In the land of Cush. Land of Cush is somewhere around beyond the rivers of Ethiopia as per the prophecy. The site of it is because it states beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, so it's a bit further south. But it is a place over there near in Congo, Rwanda, and Sudan. That's the place where Yahweh decided to have habitation or tabernacling amongst the fierce people. There are no lies over there. If you lie over there, you end up being snack for crocodiles. As the dictator Idi Amin Dada used to do. A murderer would show up causing trouble. He said, murder him and throw him in the river Nile. Give it to the crocodiles to eat. If you take a plunge over there in a diving suit, you find a lot of bones down there. You don't lie around that area. You have to have truly a mandate from Yahweh to survive around there, because if they catch you lying over there, you ended up for crocodiles. It's a very rich area with a coltan and minerals, gold, name it. And Yahweh has a site around that area over there. That's where He's going to have His tabernacling from. Yeah. Read the scripture. Beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, land of Cush. The word tabernacle means the physical place of the tabernacle, and then a deity, because the Messiah came and he tabernacled with us, his people. Speaking of the set apart, we are Gentiles. From there, the route to Jerusalem is going to be established, and then Hebrews is going to start going back and forth, up and down. So then when you read then Zechariah the 8th chapter, then you find 10 Gentiles would get a hold of the garment of the Hebraic person, the Hebraic male, because only males, they teach in their culture. Ladies don't teach. Only males teach. And they're going to grab a hold of the garment of the Hebrew person, the Hebrew male, and say, please teach us because we know Yahweh is with you. While en route going up and down, because they're going to observe the feast. While building the city. Because the cities are returning. And then the Chinese computerized system around the world. That's how the nation is going to be rebuilding. We're going to observe more Chinese patrols around the world, more military of the Chinese, until they launch their computerized system. You have the stock market in it, you have investments, you have banking, and you can invest per product. If a product that you like so much in the market, you can invest in a particular product and get a share out of it. It's a brand new system. The Chinese are only waiting for us to break ourselves in trying to launch a new bogus system that won't work. And if we do, then we're going to break our economy. And then the Chinese, they launch their system. Because you have to admit, as fast as technology is going forward, you have to understand stock exchange mixed with investments, mixed with banking, mixed with a computer, where every person on the planet can do these at the same time. Where do you think you find then in Revelation every nation doing trade with China? Third part of the ships, where do you find? Asia. Why Asia is so prosperous? Because of Shaliach Shaul had the time of dispensation, he went teaching around Asia. So you already have the nation leading market of the future. And as technology is, that's why they're going to be so prosperous. Because a combination of stock market, you know, what we do over there at New York Stock Exchange, but then in the computer, personal computer. Then you do investment, whatsoever product you want around the world. And as the nations are rebuilding, a lot of bulk products of construction materials are going to be required. You can invest in iron, you can invest in cement, and you get a share out of it. Imagine how many countries are at war and destroyed and being rebuilt. Then you begin to understand the enormity of the situation. But the Chinese are only waiting for us to make a wrong turn. Then we break ourselves and then they take over. This system is already in place. But if we are smart, then we request the Chinese to do more patrols over there in the Middle East, and we wisely retrieve to reserve. Then rather than going forward with a bogus plan, then we do the contrary. Because when the Creator is at work, then what we must not do. If we think we should launch without the proper understanding of the Scripture, then we should not launch. No launching of any kind of crazy deals. We reserve. The Eurozone is a crisis everywhere. The monetary system won't hold for very long. The euro is done away with. And then so many countries in Europe then wanting help. Where do you think they're going to get help from? From China. Thus then with the Middle East then is broken beyond imagination. As we begin to give them space to do patrols, then those nations over there broken and busted, they're going to start rebuilding. When Europe starts breaking, then the Chinese links over there with Europe. The next step then, the world is already experiencing their system. As Citibank already have a portion of their system already linked up. Do a research. Citigroup with the Chinese system. Begin to read. This is what's going to expand worldwide. They are only waiting for us to make the wrong decision and bust our economy. So let's be wise and read the scripture from the Aramaic copy. Stay tuned, much more coming up.